Hello and welcome to Season 2 of ReFocus, where we talk to artists and music industry professionals about building sustainable careers as creative workers, with a focus on folk. I'm your host, Rosalind Dennett. Hello and welcome to ReFocus. Today we're speaking with Samir Baijal. Samir has been the artistic director at the Hillside Festival since 1998. He also programs entertainment at the University of Guelph, where he has worked for 30 years. His favorite activity is going to concerts, as you can well imagine. Here's our conversation with Samir. Samir, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing very well. So excited to get to speak with you today. I've had the pleasure of getting to attend and as well as perform at Hillside. So it's a festival that's, I'm familiar with and is already near and dear to my heart. I'm wondering if you can start by telling us how you got involved in the festival and how long you've been involved.
I've been involved with the festival since like 1994, I think, 93, 94. I was just asked to kind of get involved because I was already booking music for the university. I ended up at that time joining the board of directors. It was a very hands-on board at that time. And then eventually just the circumstances were such that, we didn't really have anybody to do the official role of an artistic director. And the circumstances were that, we needed somebody to do that. And I just ended up doing it for the time being. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. It was going to be like, oh, I'm going to do this for a few months and get things started for the festival year of 98 or whatever. And then we would hire somebody, but it didn't work out that way. My plan was not to work for the festival. It was like, I was on the board. I said, I think I can help out here, at least get the process started until we figured out what we're doing. And then it just turned out that it was harder to find somebody than we thought it would be. And by the time we were doing it, I'd already booked the whole festival. And it was like, well, why don't you just do it? And I went, well, okay, let's see what happens. And that's kind of, the rest is history, literally, so.
Yeah, that's decades in the making. That's amazing.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if you can give me like a bird's eye view of the festival.
Yeah, I mean, the main event, which is the summer festival, which has been going now, I think this will be year 41 that's coming up. It's like 3 days, 6 o'clock to 6 to 11 each on Friday, and like 11 to 11 each Saturday, Sunday on Guelph Lake Island. And it's a conservation area. It's a really beautiful spot, and there's like an island there that we actually use, and we have a permanent stage that we built in the early 2000s that we use as our main stage there. And then there's like multiple stages and tents and stuff.
There's a very special vibe at Hillside. It seems like there's a community that's being created there and fostered there. What do you attribute that to, and can you describe it a bit?
Well, I think the origin of the festival, the people who started it, I mean, this is a university town, and I think university towns have fairly rich artistic communities, like small towns that have universities, like Guelph and Kingston and Waterloo and places like that. There's a rich artistic community is how I like to put it. And I think the people that started the festival were like, a collection of musicians and such, and that were from around here, and people that were involved a bit already in the arts, and they kind of went into it with this approach that this is like this localized phenomena. So I think from the get-go, the actual execution of the event was like, it was being pulled off by local people, and then they would draw from locally, and then it kind of went from there. But I think it's just because right from the beginning it was like, okay, well, where we're going to go, I mean, from what I was told, when they ended up going to, originally they were going to be on a farm and it didn't work out, and they went, okay, we're going to go to this Guelph Lake thing. And then the thing from there was like, well, you're in a conservation area and you want to be respectful to the land where you are. And, so all these things that were like done that, that Hillside has been known for over the years were just plain common sense. It wasn't like, I mean, the word green wasn't even around back then. It's just like common sense that, yeah, of course you want to be respectful of the land. You want to clean up after yourself. You want to have like, really strong values and ethics. You don't want to be commercial, be grassroots sort of that way. You don't want to have like corporate stuff going on. So I think it reflected right from the beginning a really kind of personal approach to putting on a festival, that people were very passionate about it, and it drew volunteers from here. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that the volunteer base is huge and has evolved over time, and these people really love doing what they do. Yeah, so I think that's a big part of the community that you're talking about. Is it's just that the word community is funny, because I look at it over time as like it's a community that actually doesn't have any borders, because when people come to the festival, they come from all over the place. They come from around here, but they come from all over the place. And it's kind of like when they get there, it's like you get into this zone, right? So it doesn't matter where you're from. It's not like a festival that's like, oh well, we only want to draw from local audiences. That's not true at all. It's more like, it's a community based upon like common beliefs and values and things like that, open minded to all kinds of music, which is what the festival's always been. Like it's not a folk festival, it's just a music festival, right? So the audience is really open minded and willing to embrace new artists and all different types of music. So I think that's where you put all these things together, and being smart with how you treat the land, and recycling and all these different things that have happened over forever. That's what I think gives it this characteristic of, it's a real community in the true sense.
Yeah. You mentioned the relationship with the land and some of the environmental efforts. I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit more about that, because I feel like Hillside is really an example that's used a lot in terms of festivals that are green, festivals that are kind of putting in some work to be sustainable. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when we first got out to the lake, I mean, by design, you're in a conservation park. I mean, the whole definition of a conservation park is to conserve, right? So everything that was laid out, the way the plans, the site was laid out, was done in a way with this in consideration, right? To have like the least amount of a footprint left, and making sure that you're cleaning up after yourself and things like that. Planting trees. We plant trees out there. We've been planting trees out there forever. There's an environmental team. I mean, there's so many different aspects of it that, I mean, when right down to like not using disposable plates or anything like that, right from the beginning, it was like, we're going to have dishes and we're going to have a dishwashing station. So that's where that happened. And then at some point along the way, when bottled water all of a sudden started becoming a thing, where like bottled water started showing up all over the place. And it's like, after a few years of that, it was just like, well, why are we having bottled water? This is ridiculous. So let's get a truck. Water should be free. So that was the end of that. 2007 or something is when that happened. It's like, okay, well, we're not going to have water bottles on site whatsoever. We're going to have free water, and nobody's going to sell it. It's going to be refillable containers and all that kind of stuff. And that was just like, again, it was like the common sense thing to do. Everything that's happened in this realm with this festival has just been because it's actually common sense that you do this. I mean, our relationship with our Indigenous elders, that started when we first got out there. It's like, well, we're on Indigenous land, and of course we're going to be acknowledging this. And so we had like a circle and everything at our festival right from the beginning. So it's very organic that way, like there's nothing been forced of like, well, we better do this. We live in an era now where like, Walmart has an organic section. So it's a marketable thing. It's become a marketable thing. And the flag gets waved a lot too, but you got to practice what you preach, right? And you got to be doing it for the right reasons.
You mentioned you're presenting music of all kinds. So where are you finding it? Because, if you're not defining yourself by a genre, that really opens the door to a lot of stuff. And I know that you present a pretty eclectic lineups.
Well, even like right from the beginning, when this festival was first started, like there was like a mix of music. It was like not just one type of music. The only thing that was different was in terms of like the scope of how far out you would be going out to get artists, and things like that. So it just became more like, like that circle grew, right? But, right from the beginning, that seemed to be like the mandate was like, well, we're going to present all different kinds of music. And so, whether it was folk or rock or indie rock, and there was even kind of like, music from other cultures. Right from the early days, there was stuff that was happening. They might not be coming to you from the other side of the planet, but the style of music was whatever it may be, African or different ethnic backgrounds. And then over time, as things evolved, it became like, oh yeah, well now, I'm able to try and look for artists. There's a huge network out there of people, the recommendations, starting when I started going to the WOMEX conference, in the early 2000s. That was a really good resource, not just for a place to go and see artists from all over the place, but it was actually a humongous networking situation. You're communicating with people that are doing what you do from the other side of the planet. And so that, you just had a much larger resource base of where you're getting ideas from.
Do you ever have like themes or specific kind of balances or things that you're looking for?
Off and on over the years, last number of years, we've had kind of like an inherent theme, but it doesn't necessarily dictate who I'm going to book. I mean, we've had peacemaking themes, which is like just because that's what it should be, at the time. And I think it still is actually, but it has relevance to the time we're living in and what's going on around us. I don't really book based upon themes. It's more like I might put some sessions together, like workshop sessions, or we've done some campaigns where like we've had some interviews and promotions done with artists that are appearing who will speak about, we'll ask them their opinion on achieving world peace or whatever it may be, and then they will give their personal take on that.
You mentioned workshops, and I always like to bring this up because it's not I think it's something that's so uniquely Canadian. How do you imagine workshops, and how do you put workshops together?
I think that, of course, that has also evolved over the years. There was a time where you would just throw a bunch of people into a session and see what happens, and we still do that to a certain extent, but it's a little more choreographed than that. You want to try to get people to be in a session that makes sense. It's just not just like, oh well, we got this many people, then they all need to be in something. That's not how we do it. I mean, it doesn't make sense because then you end up having kind of like situations where people maybe don't want to be in those situations. Yeah, I mean, I just look for, you've got two types of sessions really. You've got the ones where like song circles, where like there might be a theme and everybody's doing their own song, which is fine. I mean, there's a place for that. And then you've got the collaborative ones where like basically, they basically play together in some capacity. That can vary to what degree, how it turns out. Sometimes you have ones that just turn out to be completely full on jam sessions, improvised, and other ones that sort of like more of a, in between, some familiar and some not familiar. Like, I mean, a lot of time it's just a chance for the artist to just kind of drop their guard and just like, let's have some fun and see what happens. It's a very popular part of the whole thing. I mean, people love them, but they don't always work, but you're sort of taking some chances, right? But when they do work, there's something else. And I think they often will surprise the artists themselves. I know that there's, our Canadian festivals, if I think of some of the ones over the years that have really done this type of thing successfully, like, Vancouver in past years, and Calgary and Winnipeg and Edmonton and folks like that, it's not as much of a thing in Ontario as it could be. But then there isn't as many festivals in Ontario that are this type of festival, right? Like, I mean, the not for profit. There's only a few of us here. There's like, Owen Sound, Mariposa, and us, and I think there's a couple up north. That's about it. But yeah, I mean, like, you have conversations with the artist in advance and you say, okay, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? I don't just normally drop people into situations without talking to them.
It's thrilling, right? It could go either way. It's such a unique convergence of people in space and time that you're not going to get again.
Yeah, exactly. And you end up with, like, sometimes over the years, there's actually been permanent collaborations that have come out of those meetings. These are people that have never played together before, and all of a sudden, after they've done this thing, they go on and they record something together. So that has happened. I mean, not just from our festival, but from other ones, where people have played and you hear about it.
Do you have any kind of standout moments like that where you've seen some magic on the stage? And if not that, maybe like a standout performance by someone that's kind of gone on to different heights?
Well, I mean, as far as like the collab, the workshop stuff, there's been, highlights over the years. There's definitely been quite a few of them, everybody just ends up being in sync. There was one a few years ago. I think it was called We Forgot About the Time. The titles are always kind of fun. It was like, at the end of the weekend, and it was like with like, this group Las Cafeteras and DJ Shub and Leonard Sumner and some indigenous dancers and everything. And it was like completely off the charts. And in the audience, we're like, wow, we can't believe this is actually happening. So, stuff like that, when, like, it really works. And sometimes it just means like people need to drop their guard and let it go. So yeah, that's just one example.
When you are booking, do you look local as well?
Yeah. There's always some artists from around here for sure. There's a lot of people that play music in this community, and I mean, our definition of local is within 30 kilometers. Those are the only people that are actually officially allowed to submit. Is people who are within this radius, and there's an application form. Nobody else is officially allowed to submit. There's no place that you go in there on our website and go to a link where you fill out. If you live outside of this radius, you can't do it because I mean, as far as like booking the festival, like the other answer to this, the other half of this is that ideas come from everywhere. So, I mean, there's people that are being booked from all over the place, but there's always a few local artists no matter what.
What's the application window for the local artists?
It's on right now. I think it's on till it's the end of this month. I think it goes till March 1st. It's all on our website. It's in there. It's, under the getting involved, and then it's got different things, and that's how you can get to access to the form.
For folks outside of the radius, are you booking independent acts? Do you typically go through agents?
It's kind of all over the place. I can sound like a history book because I've been doing this for so long that what's happened over the last 25 years of me doing this, right? What has changed in terms of how I book this festival? Not much, except for technology. You have technology, you have access to a lot more. You can hear things, you can see things that you normally in the past wouldn't maybe be able to get as much direct. Like, here's artist X playing live. This is what it looks like, So you can get way more feedback. And then also just like in terms of the resources that are available for what you can check out what they do now. But in terms of the process, it doesn't really change much. It'll be a mixture of all of the above. I mean, I deal with agents a fair bit, but it's kind of customized, right? It isn't just like, here's our list. Who do you want? It doesn't work that way. It's like, you get to know people and they know what you do. So they don't make recommendations that are like, well, why would we ever book that? It doesn't fit our programming. There's actually sensible recommendations being made. They know your event and they know you. So
Is there a way that you don't want to be contacted?
I don't necessarily like to be constantly asked about it over and over again. Believe me, I completely understand where like people who are doing this is what they do. They want to try to get gigs. So when you run into people in different places, and it just comes with the territory. It's just that it can get delicate in the sense that, you only have room for so many artists, right? And not everybody can play. And any festival, anybody who does this job for any festival in any city will tell you that a lot of the artists who live there think that they should be playing the festival. And I get it. I understand why they feel that way. It makes total sense that they feel that way. Is it possible? No. I mean, it's impossible to sit there and say, well, every single person who plays music in this community should be playing here. There's hundreds of them. Or if you get into bigger cities, there's thousands of them. And again, I'm not on a criticism. It's more like just a fact. You're not programming the Hillside or Mariposa or whomever local artist festival. That's not what you're doing. You are programming something which people will want to come and see so they can get all kinds of stuff. So there's some local things, but there's also like a whole ton of stuff that normally doesn't come into your area, right? Like, I mean, there's this thing of like, well, there's some people that'll say, we don't want to see that many local artists at the festival because we can see them at any time during the year. Other people feel, oh no, it's like, it's a really good opportunity to see somebody play who's local, who's getting a chance to do something in a different environment, and I get that too. So I understand that part. There's two sides to the whole thing, right? But you're booking basically a festival of people that are coming from different places. And there's a component of it that has some artists from the area too. So
Do you typically book around like a headliner?
well, I mean, that approach has been kind of in there for all along. I mean, it just varies in degrees as to what extent you go. And I mean, I think we're in a time now where, like, when I first started doing this in 1998, I said something about how, it's important for us to note that we're actually part of the Southern Ontario marketplace. Like, we're not far from Toronto. Like, we're in a busy region. There's a lot going on. So we are part of that market. Doesn't matter what kind of event we are part of that market. So people have decisions and choices, and the only thing that's happened over time is that there's more of them now. There's more events, there's more festivals. Some have come and gone, but there's just a lot going on. So it's important that you try to maintain some identity and uniqueness in terms of what you do, because it's really easy to have things that people start comparing to each other. And even though they're very different, like, I mean, we're not a headliner driven festival, but we've had our share of them. We're also surrounded by tons of festivals and events and things. So there's people playing everywhere. So it's kind of like, well, if we don't have them, people can go see them somewhere else. That's fine. It's good for people can go see such and such things. So if anything, what I feel is important is that we continue to try to maintain our own identity. And your own identity isn't necessarily based upon who you book. Like, I mean, we're not a big font festival, as I call them. Like, we're not like, have the first 6 names in some humongous font and everybody else is something you can hardly read. That's not us. We do alphabetical, A to Z, same font size. You recognize a few names more than others.
We're not a big font festival is cool. I haven't heard anyone say that line before. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's just, and over the years, I've seen other people that have adopted this thing of being alphabetical on their posters as opposed to like having this thing where like it starts with like really huge names at the top. And then, after you get past 5 or 6 of them, you're starting to squint your eyes trying to read things. And it's too bad because, I mean, if anything, at all of these events, there's tons of amazing artists, right? So it's just the nature of the beast, some are more like that than others. It's more like, just the way it's a type of marketing, right, too.
Mm-hmm. How many artists do you typically book in a festival?
Well, I'm trying to scale it back a bit. It's gotten to be too many. It's getting complicated trying to schedule that many artists. So, I want to say between 50 and 60, and I'm hoping it'll be more towards the 50 because it makes it easier to schedule. But I mean, it's also hard to say no sometimes. So, but you got to find the balance. So, I mean, if anything, there's also what it costs to put things on these days is just way more than it ever used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we wrap up, I'm wondering if you can give a little nugget of, advice or stuff that you've seen that you like. What are some things that artists can do to make them stand out to you?
Well, I mean, the most important thing has to do with like, if you're going to approach somebody about performing at their festival, make sure you're familiar with their festival. Make sure you know what they do and the kind of things that they do. And believe me, we do get lots of artists who know that, including agents. They know it. Another thing is, have some good experience playing live, but I mean, doesn't mean that you can't be new. Always try to envision, like what your live show is going to be like. That's pretty much it, because the rest of it is kind of like fate. Every year this happens, the highlights of the festival each year end up being with artists that most people had never heard of.
Well, that's great. Samir, thank you so much for chatting with us today, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, take care.
That's all for this episode, friends. The Refocus podcast is brought to you by Folk Music Ontario. Find out more by heading to folkmusicontario.org/refocus. That's REFOLKUS. The podcast is produced by Kayla Nizon and Rosalind Dennett and mixed by Jordan Moore at the Pod Cabin. The opening theme is by King Cardiac and the artwork is by Jamie Card. Please give us a download, a like, subscribe, rate, and review to let us know you're listening. Until next time, keep it folk and have fun.